Greetings! In this video I'm going to be kitbashing yet more cultists. Whilst my last offering in this regard lent towards those citizens from the lower ranks of society, this time I am leaning towards the more affluent members of a hive city, having turned to the dark gods. The base model for these cultists are the Namarti Reavers from the Age of Sigmar. Their poses convey motion really well, their clothing is nicely ornate, giving a highborn vibe, and the kit comes with a nice amount of arm options that suit quite well for this kitbash. Once the body has been removed from the sprues and cleaned of tabs and mould lines, it can be glued together. At this point you could even attach it to a base if you want, but I'm going to leave that till later on and work on the arms, whilst the glue sets on the body, as I've found these guys prone to falling apart a bit if you don't let the glue dry long enough. If this happens, you can easily stick them back together again, but with all the handling I do to the models during the kit bashing process, I find it sometimes good to let something sit whilst you work on another part. Whilst this setting process is happening, the arms can be removed from the sprue and cleaned up as usual to get rid of those pesky mould lines. Starting with the right arm, I picked one holding an arrow at the ready, as I like the position of it for a gun hand. In this case, I'm going to be using an auto pistol from the Delaque kit. This kit has a lot of one-handed weapon options in it, and I found it fantastic for kit bashing cultists so far. Beginning by preparing the wrist area here, we need to snip off the tab on the weapon hand with that knife, and then bring it up to the arm. It will help to compare where to cut before taking off the hand with the arrow. Wrist prepared, we could just glue it all together with plastic glue, which would work fine if you're short on time, though in the long run a stronger joint can be made by pinning together with wire and super glue. To do this, first thing to do would be to use your knife to make a small dent where you would like the drill to go on both the wrist parts, and at this point the barrel could also be drilled out, so mark that in too. Once you have made these indents, bring in the old hobby drill and carefully drill a little way into the barrel and both wrist parts before taking some of your wire, about the same thickness as a drill bit. Paperclip wire, it works here really well. Dab a touch of super glue on the tip and you poke it into one side of the wrist. After a short time for the glue to dry, the excess wire can then be trimmed down to a couple of millimeters long. With this done, add some super glue to the exposed wire before poking it into position on the arm. Hold it for a second to let it really grip there. With the other arm, our cultist is going to have his brutal melee weapon, and for this I'm going to use one of the sickles from the Khinnerai kit from Age of Sigmar. The curved blade in this one I thought had both a nice cultist aesthetic and also looked like something exotic enough for a highborn or noble family to have in their collection. To begin with here, the blade will need to be removed from the hand, around where the blade attached to the handle. This is an easy job with a sharp knife, before bringing in the arm to compare to see where to cut the bow, so we can attach this sickle instead. Using the knife again, snip off the bow between the jutting out bits either end of the handle. In this case I left two in place at the bottom of the hand, which will be the pommel of our sickle sword, and only one at the top where the blade will attach. Once these cuts have been made, use the knife again to carefully clean up any little nubs or knobbly areas. You could use a file in this place. Now I decided here that I cut the blade too long, so I trimmed it down a little to where it's got like a little diamond shaped bit on the end of the blade, before making an indent in both the blade and the hilt to help guide the drill as we did before with the gun. The process of pinning is pretty much the same as before, however the blade is mighty thin in one direction, so take a lot of care at this stage. Slow and steady is definitely the way to go. After you repeat the pinning process from earlier, now both arms are done, but I've learned in the past that sticking them straight on sometimes can make life more difficult. With this in mind, I decided to do something about the nice square hole in the guy's back, because it doesn't really look very good. Now this hole could either be filled with some green stuff or whichever other putty that you tend to use, However, I decided that I would just cover it with some pouches. The ones I'm using came from a Space Marine Reaver set, though any pouches you have to hand large enough to cover the area and not look completely silly would work just as well. The Imperial Guard have several, as do most of the Necromunda kits. At this stage, I suggest putting at least one of the arms on, as the position of the head will be dependent on how the arms look. As they are the ones that came with the kit, they fit unsurprisingly well, and with a touch of plastic glue, the left arm can be put in place quite simply. It is this point that I remembered that the neck would need some work, and it might be a good idea to do this before the other arm goes on, which would make it very awkward to get the clippers in effectively. So before doing the other arm, in come the clippers to remove the neck, as the head I'm planning to use has a vastly different neck joint. And once it's cut off, it can be cleaned up as usual with a knife. Now this has been done, you can bring in the right arm and attach it properly. So we are at the head stage. For this model, I picked a head from the Demonette kit. The crazy hair looks as if it had some movement to it, which works well with the model's pose. It looks nicely angry and demonic, which is perfect for an enraged cultist charging into their certain doom. Demonette heads have a ball joint style neck, and the cut we have made is flat, so it will need a bit of a trim on the Demonette head. Before doing so, however, make sure you check it against the body just to make sure to see what sort of an angle you need to cut it at. And once you're satisfied you know what you're doing, carefully trim down the neck a little at a time, till it has a nice fit, before adding some glue to the mix and attaching that head. If you're after a quick and easy one, this model could in fact be left here, but I did want to take the symbol on the belt dangly thing on the left hand side. It could be left, as for a cult symbol it would probably work, but to change it a bit more from the original model, I decided to snip it off and replace it with something just a little bit more spiky. To do this, clippers can be used to take off the symbol, leaving the top loop of it intact to attach our spiky thing to. And, speaking of spiky things, I decided to use the tip of his old bow. A quick snip with the knife, being careful to stop the tip we need flying off into oblivion, and it can be glued in place on the dangly bit. With that final step, he is done. Attach him to a base with some glue, give him some basing materials and a lick of paint, and he will be completely finished. Now I did a whole squad of these guys using the same techniques, however I did use some other parts in places. Head-wise, I used some from the Khinnerai kit. The spear which I used also came from the Khinnerai kit. The augmented head came from the Delaque kit. And finally the shotgun and arms on the one lady was from the Escher gang that I had left over from my last cultist conversion. So, with all that done, I hope this gave you some more ideas for cultists, as until Games Workshop gives us some nicer models, we'll just have to make our own. If you did like this video, consider a like, maybe subscribe if you're so inclined. As I am having fun doing these, I shall hopefully see you in the next video. Thanks for watching, and good night all.